Hey, have you ever given someone a gift and you've been way more excited to give the gift than they were to receive the gift? You ever been like that? Yes. Okay. It's Christmas about, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago or so, maybe more. I reckon I'd been married, 10 years or so. I had kids, but they were really young. And I bought Roz a skirt for Christmas. It was exactly, you know where this story's going, don't you? That's right. Well, that's exactly right. It was a wraparound linen skirt. It was quite trendy back in the day. But that's not the point. The point was exactly as you say, that I bought my wife clothes. I'd never bought my wife clothes. And to be honest, she didn't really want me to buy her clothes. She'd seen the kind of clothes that I bought for myself and realised it probably wasn't a good thing. But I was really excited. I couldn't wait for her to open this gift and realise that I'd thought about clothes and I'd gone clothes shopping for her. I won't tell you how it went. What I will tell you is that during this week, I said to her at home, I said, "Hey, Roz, can you remember what year it was?" Because I was going to give you the year. "Can you remember what year it was that I bought you that skirt for Christmas?" And she responded with these two words: "What skirt?" I want to say, what skirt? All right? Yeah, it's all right. My counsellor says I'm getting over it. And we're in the fourth part, which will be the final part of a series that we're calling Deep. We wanted to kick off the year talking about the year and what 2025 looks like, how we get there, and specifically we wanted to talk about what our faith, what our life with God would look like this year, what life with God would look like in 2025, because as we've said in the setup to this series, you've probably had thoughts about what this year's going to look like at work. You've probably had thoughts about what this year's going to look like at school. You might have holidays planned with your family. You might have things and ideas planned for your friends. But have you thought about what your faith will look like this year? We've said the truth is that this year, as with every year, this year is a blank page before each of us. We've got ideas and things that we think are going to happen. It's a blank page. None of us really know what's going to happen this year. And what will happen for us this year will be, at least in some part, in significant part, filled with the individual daily decisions that we make. We all make decisions every day, heaps of decisions every day about where we're going to spend our time, about where we're going to spend our money, about the sort of relationships that we're going to lean into, the sort of people that we're going to have around us. We're going to decide each day the things that are important to us. We often call those our priorities. And what happens this year will be in part the total of those thousands of individual daily decisions. And so what happens in our faith this year will be the total of those thousands of individual daily decisions we make about our faith. Or to say it another way, the daily decisions that we make, all those thousands of tiny daily decisions, will shape what our faith looks like, what our faith, our life with God looks like in 2025. And so this series has been about asking ourselves, what are those moment-by-moment daily decisions? What are those daily faith decisions that we can make that will change our faith? If you want 2025 to be a good year with God, if you want to get to the end of 2025 and say to yourself, "Wow, my faith is flying," what are the daily decisions you should make now and in the days between now and the end of the year to make that happen? In part one of the series, we talked about living this year fully committed to God. We said if you want this year to work, and by work we mean if you want this year, this faith year, for you to be fulfilling, if you want it to be fun, if you want it to be impactful, if you want a faith that sort of makes a difference in your life, a positive difference in your life and the lives of people around you, if you want that kind of faith life this year, the first big daily decision you need to make is, will I go full on for God? Will I be full on? Will I be all in? Will I be fully committed? The word we've used is, will I go deep with God this year? Because there's another option, isn't there? There's an option to live a sort of casual, half-hearted, what we've said, a sort of faith in the shallows kind of year. And most of you know this already, that casual faith, half-hearted faith, faith that stays in the shallow end, it doesn't work. It's not fulfilling. It's not fun. It doesn't make a difference to us and to other people around us. In actual fact, for most of us, it's frustrating. People who live this kind of shallow, sort of casual life, faith life, often end up thinking, is this faith thing really worth it at all? In part 2, we talked about the daily decision to spend valuable time with God. And we said the most important decision we make if we want faith to work for us this year is to set aside some priority time in your life to hang out with God daily. To read the Bible, to pray, to listen to the Holy Spirit, to ask Him to speak to you and to direct your life. We said, why is this the most important daily decision we make? Because when we spend time with God, when we spend daily time with God, that's where we find hope. That's where we get reminded that in the middle of a world that is dark and chaotic, that there's still a God who reigns, that there's still a King beyond the difficult circumstances that even this week that we see in the world all around us. It's where we get encouragement. It's where we could find a space to be lifted up when we feel down. It's where we build our knowledge, where we actually understand things of God, understand the way that He's made us, understand who He is, understand the world around us. It's where we get direction. It's what helps us make decisions. It's what helps us determine good from bad and right from wrong, helps us make decisions about our career and our family and relationships. In part 3 last week, we talked about the daily decision to connect in community. We said that Christian faith was never meant to be a solo sport. Christianity's always been something that's happened with other people. But that kind of faith with others doesn't happen, like any of these things, doesn't happen by accident. We have to decide to make it happen. We have to make those daily decisions to be honest and open with other people, to care for other people, to listen to other people, to talk with other people, to encourage other people, to pray with other people. We have to decide to do faith with others, to be here Sunday and to make time for other Christians during the week. But there's one final big decision that we have to make if we want our faith to really work this year. Because the truth is that faith that really works, a faith that is fulfilling and fun and impactful and make a difference and those sort of words, a faith that really works is never just about us. A faith that works has always been a faith, Christian faith that works has always been faith that focuses on other people. For 2,000 years, alive and fun and meaningful faith has been faith that puts others first. It's been a generous kind of faith. It's been a faith that serves others. Not because we have to, not because there's some rule or there's some God saying do this or else, but because we want to. Because we realise that in some sort of inside way, this is the way that we were created to live. Because we realise that actually this is the path, serving others is the path to us living our best lives. We talked about Genesis 1 last week. We talked about the creation story that is Genesis 1. We talked about God's extraordinary creativity. And Genesis 1 is obviously a story about the creativity of God. But Genesis 1 is also a story about the abundance and the generosity of God. God creates all kinds of plants. God creates trees full of fruit, he says. Waters teeming with living creatures, birds in the sky. And Genesis 1:22 says that God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters of the sea and let birds multiply on earth. And when God creates people, you and me, he says the same thing. Genesis 1, chapter 1, verse 28 and 29, God blessed them, the first people, and he said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and every creature that crawls upon the earth. Then God said, behold, which is Bible talk for pay attention, behold, I've given you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the earth and every tree whose fruit contains seed, they will be yours for food. Can you hear the language of sort of abundance and generosity in what God's doing for people? Words like be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, I've given you everything, they will be yours. Maybe you've never thought about it this way, but creation is an act of generosity. Creation itself is a gift from God to humanity. Creation gives us a picture of who God is. It gives us a picture of a God that is generous, that is full of abundance and more and overflow. Creation is a story of God saying to humanity, look at all that I've got for you. Look at all that I've prepared for you. This is all for you. And remember we said last week, we're made in the image of that God. That DNA is our DNA. We're made by a generous God. We're made in the image of a generous God. We're made to be generous and kind, just like God. That's who we're made to be. It's who God is, and it's who we are. Some of you know the next part of the story, because instead of accepting and trusting and enjoying the abundance that God gives, the first people got greedy and decided they wanted more, and they wanted more on their terms. And so while God is giving, the first people take. In Genesis 3, a serpent enters the picture. It's an image of Satan or the devil or that sort of evil that exists in our world. The serpent enters the picture and tricks Eve into thinking that God is somehow holding out on her. There's actually more that he's not giving her, and convinces her, instead of looking at all the abundance that there is, to start to look at the lack that there isn't. Because God says to her, I give you every tree, all of this you can have, but don't eat of that tree, because that's not good for you. Genesis chapter 3 verse 6, when the woman saw that the fruit of that tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, she took some of it and ate it. The language around God is all language about giving, and now all of a sudden the language around Eve and humanity is what? Is taking. And we all kind of know the result. We're living in it today. The result is that selfishness and greed and hate and violence enter the world, and we've been living in that mess ever since. But of course, God is so generous. God is so loving and so kind that he doesn't give up on these horrible, selfish people. He continues to reach out to them again and again with his gift of life and love and freedom. God continues to love people and to give to them generously, while people continue to reject his gift and try and do things on their own. And the story goes on like that literally for thousands of years, for generation after generation. It's like a playlist on repeat. It happens again and again and again. This is really the story of the Old Testament parts of our Bible. God chasing people with love and generosity and abundance, and people running away determined to do their own thing. And then God enters the world with his ultimate act of generosity. John describes it like this, John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave. That he gave his only son. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but Jesus is a gift. Jesus is a gift. It's an unbelievable act of generosity from God to humanity, from God to you. Jesus gives his own son. Jesus gives up God gives up his own son. Jesus is a gift. God gives up the thing that is most precious to him. He gives up his own son. I mean, I know there's some parents in the room. How many of the parents in this room would give up their own kids? And our kids aren't even that good, right? But God gives up his own son. We didn't ask for it. We certainly didn't deserve it, but God gave his son, and in his death and resurrection, through Jesus, again, he gives us the gift of life and freedom and eternity with him. This is the good news of Christianity, right? This is what following the King Jesus is all about. Now, I get it. This sounds all a bit like a history lesson, but this is an important basis to understand how we come to be the church today. But let me show you what this looks like in real life. Because fast forward about 25 years or so after the resurrection of Jesus, and there are little churches like this, little groups of followers of Jesus popping up all over the place in cities all over the place. And Paul was one of the leaders in that early space, and he's writing letters. He's looking out after these churches and trying to encourage them and help them to grow. And he writes a letter to a church in the city of Corinth. This is what artists think Corinth looked like. It was a huge, bustling metropolis 2,000 years ago. I think there's another photo. Huge public spaces, and this is what Corinth looks like today. You can go there. It's a tourist attraction in Greece, and you can still see some of the. You can still see some of the the individual rooms. You get a sense of what this amazing place was like. Paul's writing to this church. He's writing to this church about a gift that this little group of Christians has promised to give to Christians in another place who are really needy. Just like just like we've sort of gathered and said, hey, here's a need, can we meet it? This church was doing exactly the same thing, and he's writing to them about this gift that they've promised. Because Paul's going to send some of his team to collect the gift. Right? Couldn't EFT stuff, right? So someone had to go and collect it all up and take it. So he's going to send some of his team, and he's writing a letter ahead of the team to make sure that everything's ready. Listen to what he writes to this little church about their gift. This is 2 Corinthians chapter 9. I'm going to start reading at verse 5. Paul writes, so I thought it necessary to urge the brothers, that's the team that he's sending, to urge the brothers to visit you beforehand and make arrangements for the bountiful gift that you've promised. This way, your gift will be prepared generously and not begrudgingly. Because he says, remember this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. Whoever sows generously will also reap generously. Each one of you should give what he's decided to give. Each one of you should give what he's decided to give in his heart, not out of regret or compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Now, talking about God, he who supplies the seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your store of seed and will increase the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way to be generous on every occasion, so that through us, your giving will produce thanksgiving to God. Can you see the link between God's generosity and our generosity? Paul reminds them that God supplies seed to the sower and bread for food. He's saying, remember that all generosity starts with God because he's given us everything. Did you notice those words like supply and multiply? They're all echoes of the Genesis 1 language, right? That God is the supplier and that it will multiply just as God promised way back then. And he says, and remember, the more you give, the better it is for you. Did you notice that? I mean, obviously, the more you give, the better it is for someone else. But he says the more you give, the better it is for you. He's reminding them that giving to others is good for them. Giving to others is also good for you. He says, verse 11, you will be enriched in every way, to be generous on every occasion, so that through us, your giving will produce thanksgiving to God. He's saying when we give, other people get blessed. Other people will want to thank God because of our generosity. He's literally saying that, that when we give, other people will say, thank God for Bev. Thank God for Tom. Thank God for Tan. Thank God for Dave. Thank God for Shayla. He says, but you will be enriched as well. When you give, something good happens inside us as well as inside other people. Paul's trying to explain here that giving begins with a generous God. That God's given us everything and that we're made to be generous and to give and to serve because we're made in the image of God, right? He doesn't say that, but that's the implication of what he's saying. And he's saying that when we do, others will be blessed and we will be enriched. That's just how generosity and serving works, because that's how we've been created. That's why generosity and giving and serving are part of how we create an awesome faith for ourselves in 2025. Friends, we worship an incredibly generous God. God has given us everything, life and love and hope and freedom. Everything we have comes from God. We're generous to others because God's been generous to us. We're generous to others because we're created in the image of that generous, loving God. We're literally created to be generous, to serve and to give. It's the way that we're created and it's good for us. In studying for this, I came across a paper, an article written by a mental health expert. This person is not a Christian. It's a mental health expert writing in the mental health space in Australia. And he wrote this in his article. He said, evidence shows that helping others is beneficial to your mental and physical health. Putting other people's needs before your own can reduce stress and improve mood, self-esteem, and happiness. That's a non-Christian mental health expert explaining that the research shows that giving and serving is good for our mental and physical health. And if Paul read this, if Paul could somehow come back from that, I'm sure Paul would read this and go, well, of course it is. That's the way humans are created to work. It's just the way the world works. So, let's talk about what does this look like on the daily? Because we're talking about, daily decisions. What does this actually look like daily? What does it actually look like to be generous and to give and to serve? And let's acknowledge up front, you could talk about this forever. This is an unlimited list, but let me throw a few ideas. We're going to talk more about this in our small group, but let me throw a few things in to kickstart the conversation. It obviously includes being generous with our money, right? And I say obvious because it is obvious that it includes being generous, but I say that too because while it's obvious, this is the hard part for most of us, right? Because, I'm sure you're like me in this regard, just bombarded with messages every day telling us to take and to get and to hold and to have, which is exactly what the serpent was telling Eve way back then, right? But remember what Paul's telling the Corinthians is that generosity blesses others, generosity also blesses us. And I was like, this is why churches encourage people to give. And I want to say this because there's a lot of confusion about this. Because the truth is that when we give in a church context, sure, we pay the bills, right? And We buy the screen and, we turn the lights on and all that sort of stuff. And sure, the money that we give blesses others, and we've seen lots of that happen in this church. But one of the reasons that churches encourage people to give is because it grows your faith. It's actually good for you. And if you were here last week, remember we talked about Acts chapter 2, and we talked about this picture of the early church and the way that they gave and served and the way that it was all about other people and the blessing that came from that, just how energised people were from that and how the church grew and what a positive atmosphere that was. Generosity and giving brings us joy. It literally improves our mental and our physical health. Non-Christian experts are telling us that this isn't a church thing. So generosity has to include our money. And it has to include our money both inside the church and outside the church. Now, I want to say, we don't talk a lot about giving inside the church. Some of you may notice we don't have an offering here. Lots of churches have a time where they pass around it. We don't do that here. We have little slips at the back with our EFT details on it. We encourage you to give. We encourage you to be a part of what God's doing here. So there's certainly a financial giving aspect inside the church, but this is also about outside the church. This is about being generous wherever you are. Giving outside the church, that might be giving to charities or other causes. It might be giving to individuals in your neighbourhood. It might be partnering with organisations to give to people across the world. And we could talk about this for ages. All I want to say is, if you're sitting here thinking, well, I'd love to give, but I'm not sure where to, just do some research and start asking people, right? Ask people in your small group. I guarantee your small group this morning, if you say, I'm not sure where I should give, has anyone got any ideas? People will have ideas, right? Giving has to include our money, but it's not just about our money. Generosity is also about our time. Making time for others, doing things for others. And we're not just talking about your friends, we're talking about anybody. And just like giving money, giving our time happens both inside the church and outside the church. Inside is about being a part of the community here. Because some of you can show up to church and just kind of take, and assume that everyone else does stuff. Now, tide's a little bit different. I'm just going to talk about us just for a moment. Tide's a little bit different because some of you notice, with the exception of the worship team, because we need to make sure that there are no rosters here at all. And that's actually deliberate. Because we don't want to be a church where people go, I have to go to church this morning because I'm doing this. Instead, what we've said is we want to be a mature community where people will say, you know what, there's stuff to be done and I just want to help be a part of it. So you can show up here. We don't have a roster that says this person's on setup today and this person's on setup. There's a couple of us that show up here at 9 o'clock every Sunday, and we say, if you want to show up here at 9 o'clock on any Sunday and help us set up, come. We'll tell you what to do. You don't need any experience. It's really easy. It's generally a little bit of fun. But there's lots of other things that you might have noticed happen around here. You can join Emily and Shayla and Beck and make all the video stuff happen here. These girls are amazing, but it doesn't need to be just them. Anyone can do this. Emily will teach you, right? Won't you, Emily? Yeah. You can help Micah and make the video stuff happen. Either in the service here or if you're into video editing and whatever, it's free software and you can help get that up during the... There's lots of little things that can happen. And we want to be a place where that's not sort of left just to any one person, but where everyone gets involved. Now, I want to say, we're not asking everyone to show up at 9 o'clock every week. We're not asking everyone to stay till we close the doors at 12:30 every week. What we're saying is just get involved at some point. Do something. We believe, in fact, the church has believed this for 2,000 years, so it's not just we believed. We believe that every person who says yes to Jesus, every Christian, has spiritual gifts. These are special abilities given to them by the Holy Spirit for them to use to build up and encourage the church. We did a whole series on this last year, and we taught all about what the Bible has to say about this. And part of what we did in that time is, as a whole church, we took a survey that helped us understand what our spiritual gifts are, because some of us were sitting here saying, oh, I don't know, and whatever, and we found and adapted a survey that points us in the right direction. So I want to say, if you haven't done that, if you're sitting here this morning thinking, I've got no idea what you're talking about, I've never heard this spiritual gifts thing, or can't remember it, you can still do it. And if after small group time today, if you see Megan, she's got a bunch of those surveys, she'll give you one and she'll walk you through the process over the next sort of week or two. Do it in your own time. It's totally free, there's no cost to it. It's a really helpful way for you to understand and to start to open up the way that God's created you, the spiritual gifts that He's put inside you, and that becomes a doorway into working out how can I serve and where can I serve and how can I be part of what's happening here, but also not here, also beyond here in the world. Because this kind of service, this isn't just a once a week thing, right, that you tick off when you come to church on a Sunday. This is a lifestyle because it's the way we're created, right? So just like giving money, just like giving financially, being generous with our time is something that happens daily for a Christian, for a follower of Jesus. It's something where you start to ask yourself, how can I serve God today at school? How can I serve God today at work? How can I serve God on the roads as I drive, as I play sport, as I hang out with my family and my friends? And you know this better than I. There's opportunities all around us, right? This isn't about whether you work in a Christian workplace or you work with other Christians or whatever. There are opportunities all around us, and I'd say the same thing as I said about financial money giving. If you're not sure, ask. Ask your small group. Ask other Christians. So, how do you think? Here's my life. How do you think I could serve? People have millions of ideas for you, right? There'll be lots to talk about in our small groups this morning. Before we finish, I want to remind you what I've said each week. This whole series, there's nothing I've said today that is about how to make God love you. This is all about how to enjoy life more with a God who already loves you. God's abundance, God's generosity doesn't come to us with any kind of strings attached. He's going to love you completely, full on, 100%, whatever you do, whatever you choose about Him. What we're talking about has nothing to do with making God love us. It's got nothing to do with whether you're a good person, whether anyone in the church thinks you're a good person, whether God thinks you're a good person. This is all about how to get the most out of life with a God who already loves you and already thinks you're extraordinary because He created you that way. We live in a world that is all about me. Well, not me, but you. Do you know what I mean? Like all about each of us, right? We live in a world that is all about what I can get, about what I've got, and about how to hold on to what I get and what I've got. And you might say, thinking about that, it's no wonder that so many people are so unhappy in the world around us. Thinking like that, it's no wonder that so many people are struggling with life because they're simply living in a way that they were not designed to live. We weren't created to live that way, and so when we live that way, we're living sort of out of step with the way that we were designed to live. We were made in the image of a generous God. Jesus is that generous God's ultimate gift to us. And we were made to live generously. Or to put it another way, your best life is found on the other end of generosity and giving and serving others. This series has been about trying to show you what that life looks like. But as I've said each week, now the choice is up to you.